Welcome back to Pop Culture Therapy. It's been a while since we had our last podcast and therapy chair session. I'm Advent Nebula.
I'm Cruellica Kain, and unfortunately, real life took us out of being able to chat with y'all.
Yeah, but we're back, and we all have seen Captain Marvel, hopefully, by now, because we're going to be starting off with a little bit of discussion, but we're going to try to keep the spoilers to a minimum.
We will. Captain Marvel was a good movie, so that's neither here nor there. I enjoyed it. It had its flaws. It had its positives. There's only one thing I wanted from Captain Marvel, and that's it. And that is, I want Rogue. That's all.
Yeah, and with what we've gotten now with the March 20th, the X-Men rights revert fully to Disney. So we more than likely will see X-Men starting to come into Phase 4. But for me, I'm a fan of the Captain Marvel comics since Carol became Captain Marvel in 2012. Enjoyed her when she was the Miss Marvel character, even though at times her story was way too convoluted in the 80s and 90s. But what they did here, and just re-upped and changed her origin story to fit within the MCU context, it worked extremely well. And I'm happy with what they did and what they changed. But I gotta say, Goose steals the movie.
Oh, Goose, the Flurkin?
Flurkin, yeah.
Was the most incredible animal I've ever seen in my life. I actually love the character. And I love the way... I think you see this in the trailer with Fury.
Yeah, when he first interacts with Goose.
When he first interacts with Goose, it's like so adorable because one, it's Samuel L. Jackson. Samuel L. Jackson does not seem like that cuddly type of human being. So seeing Samuel L. Jackson playing Nick Fury, who also does not appear to be this cuddly type of human being, cuddle with this cat is like beyond awesome. And then you find out what it is. I was like, wait... It's related to Dagon and Cthulhu and all the other old ones?
Yeah, especially anybody who's seen the comics or read the comics knows about Chewbacca, Carol's cat, which is the Flurkin that Rocket freaks the hell out about because Flurkins are, let's need to say, a planet-killing alien at times.
Yeah, when I read about the Flurkin after we seen the movie... Because I was confused because I had no idea that there could be a tentacle monster in Marvel because that seems to be more of an anime shtick. But, more hentai anime, but still anime. I did, not knowing too much about Captain Marvel or Miss Marvel outside of the X-Men comics, which admittedly is regulated to the origin story of how Rogue got her powers. So it was nice to kind of see something that was a little bit different. I do like the fact that it, once again, kind of like with Captain America, took place in another time frame. The only downside, and I think a lot of people have made this comment, is I lived in the 90s. The 90s were a great decade, but compared to like 80s music, which is like so uplifting or so powerful or can really fit in any narrative, 90s music was a cluster of just great songs, but they didn't fit in any kind of cultural narrative.
And when they did, having the movie take place in 95, you kind of have the tail end of grunge and that start up of what became the real barn burner of all the commercialized pop that started around 97, 98.
Exactly. I do like the fact that you get to see the last actual blockbuster in existence in the country.
Yep. Yeah, and they did film that at the real last blockbuster. If you've read about the stories, it's in Oregon, and that's where they filmed it, which is kind of a nice nod for that.
Oh, yeah. But it was a great movie. It once again, it did its one job that I think you needed from this movie. Kind of like what Black Panther did. Black Panther was an incredible movie, so I'm not trying to diminish that. Like, I'm not trying to diminish this. But almost immediately after Black Panther, we had Infinity War.
Yep.
Now, almost immediately after this movie, we have Endgame. So it just helps hype everything up.
Yeah, and the end credit scene, I'm not going to spoil what it was, but was filmed by the Russo brothers to be the tie-in to Endgame, which makes me wonder if it's like with Civil War, with the end credit scene they had at the end of, I can't remember what movie it was, but I'm wondering if it's just going to be like that exact scene is in Endgame, and it would not surprise me.
I agree. I have faith that they're going to have some kind of correlation. And for anybody who did not like the movie, I can respect why you wouldn't like it. One, it's hard to really do anything above and beyond what its predecessors done, because it is the 21st Marvel Cinematic Universe film. Let's just pause for a minute and reflect on the fact that a movie, not really, well, Marvel Studios, let's just put it that way, has created 21 films that all interconnect with each other. That is something that's very rarely done in movies. You see it in television series all the time. Twilight Zone, well, they interconnect, but you got to see little stylings of
Outer
it.
Limits did it.
Outer Limits.
And I'm talking about the 80s version of
Yes,
Outer Limits.
the older version. But a lot of television shows do that, where you have everything interconnect. Even the comic book shows that you have now with Arrow, Flash, all of that, they interconnect in their own subtle way. Yep. But to have a movie universe do it is pretty impressive. But at the same time, you're going to get to that point where there is nothing new. And admittedly, yes, it's the first female superhero film, but Wonder Woman did it better. And that's not to be mean or anything, but there was just so much more power in the Wonder Woman aspect.
Where both are great films, but for me, I do like Captain Marvel a little bit better just because of the way the villains and the twist was handled. The way Wonder Woman handled Ares was just too left field for me.
I agree, but I feel, without going into spoilers, there were a couple of missed opportunities that could have gone a little bit further.
Yeah, they did play it a little too safe at times with this. But we're coming up on Phase 4, which I think Marvel's really saving, because right after Far From Home with Spider-Man, their next two greenlit films are Black Widow and The Eternals. Black Widow's going to be another 90s period piece to confirm, and The Eternals is going to go all the way to the beginning of what the universe established. So those are going to be their two tests after Spider-Man to see where they're going to go with.
My biggest concern about Black Widow, and this will actually lead into our topic of the week, is Black Widow is more of a, she's a pseudo-villain, pseudo-hero, because she's a merc.
Yeah, she'd be what you would call your villain turned anti-hero, basically.
Exactly, and the problem with that's how she is in the comics. How she is in the movies,
They've kept her as an anti-hero for the most part.
As a hero, anti-hero, very fine line there. But you know that there's a backstory where it goes into the Russian...
Which is what this movie's going to touch on. And
I'm a little worried because they've kept Black Widow very safe. Like, she doesn't even have the accent anymore. And every incarnation of Black Widow, cartoon, comic, even though you're only reading words, you could tell there's some sort of affectation or accent there. Yeah,
the only one that's really taken away her accent has been the modern Avengers cartoons, but you've still had the backstory there as well.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So we'll see how it goes. Right now, there's only been a couple of movies in the cinematic universe that have been flops for me. Dark World.
Same for me.
And Iron Man.
I'd say both 2 and 3 for me.
That's what I would say. I like them both, but it's hard. Especially because with Iron Man 3... Pepper is supposed to have these powers, but in any future incarnations that you see of Pepper...
They've kind of written it out.
They've kind of stepped back from that.
And I think a part of that was Shane Black had a little too much control on the script in that one. And Marvel's like, we're taking a little more control on this.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm going with it. But overall, I will... If nothing else, for anybody who is getting frustrated with it, at least you can use Endgame as a finite stopping point. Because it's a nice way to kind of just stop, separate, and move on.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to see another Fate movie.
Yes. I am going to go see the second in the Heaven's Feel trilogy of movies on this Thursday. Looking forward to that. Especially as somebody who's actually read a translated version of the visual novel. So it's kind of nice to actually see animation to a story that's 15 years old that you never seen an animation for to it yet. And being a very deep and intricate plot. But like anything with the Fate universe, everything's connected. Everything's canon. And that actually is true.
No, and I think that's pretty awesome. I have not stepped into that Fate universe of really being able to... Not that it's a lack of interest, it's just a lack of time.
Yeah, if you didn't start out in the early part of it, it's at this point a time commitment. So, leaving off on that, you've had a busy week, so you really haven't done anything really on that, have you?
Well, I've caught up on some of my anime shows. JoJo's, I'm going to be watching My Roommate as a Cat.
Oh yeah, you got to experience what the is King Crimson's power.
Oh yes. No, I actually love the undead part of that entire episode. Which I got into a whole long conversation while I'm trying to deadlift while I was exercising over the weekend, talking about King Crimson's power and all the other characters in relation to it. So, I know I seem like I'm hedging. I just don't want to spoil it for anybody who doesn't know the story. The other thing that I've watched, and actually you watched it recently with me, is we watched the American adaptation of Go Busters, Beast Morphers. And for a first episode of a series that's probably, what, 5, 6?
About 6 years old.
6 years old. Maybe 6, 7. It's hard to know because there's so many series. It actually did fairly well.
I like the reconstruction Hasbro has done with these suits, since most of them were not in condition that Toei could actually hand them over for immediate use.
Well, I think Toei helped with that, just to keep it canon. But kind of like a few of the other modern Power Ranger shows, they are doing a lot of original footage.
Yeah.
Which, admittedly, for a show like Go Busters in Japan, it actually works because Go Busters, I always felt, was a homage to Power Rangers.
It felt like it was when you actually watched the show, and I'm like, wow, the writers seem to have approached it like they knew that, and at the same time, it's feeling like an RPM style show the way this one's going, like it's going to be a darker tone series.
I'm thinking so. It was a little surprising because two of the main human versus suited villains were Enter and Escape, and Escape comes latter half of the series, but they brought her in pretty immediate, which I think makes sense.
Yeah, and I like the twist that Blaze and Roxy, the two that were supposed to be the Yellow and the Red Ranger originally, are now the villains for this show.
I agree. I do like that. I'm actually curious to see. I don't know if I'll keep up with it or if we'll keep up with it as active as we do our regular Toku stuff.
I think this is just something because Kaiju's going to be recording it, we'll just let a few episodes go and then we'll just watch it that way.
Exactly. The only thing that scares me, every time we finish the episode, we get to see the opening for SpongeBob, and I'm like, wow, that show's still going on.
But like I said, it's now SpongeBob is aimed towards stoner adults.
It makes sense. Beyond that, for me, it's actually been kind of real life I'm the reason it's been so long for the last podcast, because kind of cool thing for me. I'm getting awarded at work for a huge project I did. So that's kind of why it's been so busy. But we're going to be a little bit more frequent. We'll probably have a break closer to the end of the month because I'll be out of town. But maybe we'll try doing some recording while I'm out of town, just to
more than likely different. You'll see some vlogs from her while they're at Anime Detour at the end of this month. And then in April, Colorado Anime Fest will do the same thing. And more than likely, with our press stuff, count on, with some of the actors, it may not be a video episode, but we'll end up doing it as a podcast episode
Exactly.
instead.
Yeah, we might do different things just to accommodate them as well as accommodate the pop culture therapy aspect of it. But what have you been doing this week?
Phew, outside of what we did on Saturday, about halfway through Yakuza 0 now. Yeah. I knew this was going to be a commitment for these games. I just didn't realize I was already 30 hours in and I was only halfway through the game for a beat-em-up.
That's not surprising. And Kaiji Okami just platinum Spider-Man.
Which, just about, 20 or so minutes ago before we started recording this, I had to give him advice so he wouldn't rage through a mission.
Oh, he probably still would have. Yeah. But he platinumed it quicker than you did, as well as Silverquill did. I was actually... And Silverquill doesn't platinum games very often, so I was pretty surprised about that.
I play games that take too much commitment and time for me to platinum at times.
Yeah, I don't have the attention span to platinum. I just have the attention span to start playing, and then I'll break off for about 6 months, go back to it, and either start from where I was at, forget where I was at, start all over again, and then have Kaiji Okami yell at me because I started a game that's 150 hours normally. Over and over again, because I've played Persona 3 about 6 times and I've only beaten it once.
And we know you're going to do that with Persona 5 because you got stuck in those spaceports.
Yeah, pretty much. But going into the main topic, so we don't think about how foolish Cruellica Kain is with her video game habits, let's focus on our topic at hand. And this is actually... why people love villains. We actually did a panel about this, and I'm going to be doing another similar panel for the next con we're going to. But rather than just what makes an anime villain, which was that panel, why people love villains.
Yeah, and it's got so many different types of villain categories. We broke this down to 9 different categories. We do have the panel up on the Kaiju Okami page for you to go and delve deeper into this, but we're going to be talking about spectrums, about 3 to 4 villains for each of us that we like. This more than likely won't be the first time we go on to this topic either.
No, I think we do more of an extended pop culture therapy session where we segment out specific villains or things like that. But what always fascinates me about villains is I've always been that fan. While I want the hero to win, for some sick, twisted reason, I root for the villain.
But keep in mind our D&D alignments. We both align on the evil side. You being the chaotic and me being the neutral.
Oh, and it's... But at the same time, you can't have a good story without a good villain.
Yeah, and some of the best villains are charismatic and just know how to steal the show.
They do. And yes, you can have some good villains or cliche. Like, I was thinking about this, because I've been rereading the Harry Potter books, along with reading all the fan fiction known universe, because I am a huge Harry Potter fanfic fan. Which sounded really weird to say it like that. But nevertheless, Voldemort.
Yeah.
He is kind of a combination of watching the world burn and being kind of cliche about it.
Yeah, he is pretty cliche about it.
And if it wasn't for the other villains that came along with it, like Lucius Malfoy or Bellatrix Lestrange, those types of villains, even though they were only limited to like certain books and things like that, if it wasn't for those villains along with the persona that was Voldemort before he came on the scene, I don't know if I or millions of other people would have enjoyed the books for as much as they are, because yes, you want Harry Potter to win. You he's gotten so much shit taken out of him throughout the years that you're like, he needs to win. But then you get to Voldemort and you're like, really? At least you had everyone else.
Yeah, Voldemort is a cliche, want to watch the world burn villain. But what makes him so interesting is the other people that are just swayed by him and his ideals.
Well, that's exactly it. There's this charisma about it that it's fascinating. And that's what I like about pop culture in general is we have so many different stories that are told. While I was watching Kaiju play Spider-Man, I was Otto Octavius. And I've never really thought of him as like this brilliant... he's a great doctor, but I never thought of him as like this brilliant leader of villains type thing, but...
Yeah, but onto that, with that, Doc Octavius is that hyper-intelligent. He's also the charismatic, sympathetic villain. He fits all of those traits.
Well, it does.
And not just in the more recent video game, but you go back and read comic issues of Spider-Man with Doc Ock in the 80s and 90s. The way he was portrayed in the Spectacular Spider-Man show. They all have that aspect where Doc Ock is this brilliant man. He's charismatic, but you can't help but sympathize with him for everything that's gone wrong with him. And almost always, Norman Osborn happens to be one of the major reasons everything's gone wrong for him.
Yeah, Norman Osborn is just... He's a terrible... For me, he's actually one of my least favorite villains because I understand why he is so important and so popular. But there's always, for me, for a villain, there always has to be that connection. And I think it's because as humans, we have so many multitude of emotions. We have our positivity. We have people like Silverquill, for example. We jokingly call him in our friend group our moral compass. Because anytime we think we're going to go down the path that's very, very wrong, he kind of finds a way to range us back in and get us on the straight and narrow, or as close to straight and narrow as we can get. So you have characters that have to fit that type of narrative of, are they doing it because it's important? Like, look at Lelouch.
Yeah.
Lelouch
Which he started out as the hero of the series, and as we learned in The Dark Knight Rises, sometimes you see yourself live long enough to become a villain. That's what Lelouch did.
Exactly. And that's what makes a good villain, is you have to have something that connects you. Because the Joker's great as a villain, but there's, depending on the medium of where you're finding the Joker, like Heath Ledger's Joker.
Yeah.
That was a Joker that I could not sympathize. All I wanted was Batman to win.
Yeah. Where New 52 Joker's one of those where he's gone so insane that you just want Joker to get out of the picture, but you realize Batman's only point is to end up becoming the Batman who laughs, which is what happens when Batman turns into the Joker. Is really the only way to get rid of Joker at this point in the comics. But
the best incarnation of Joker that is that appealing, like, connection that you get that's like an arrogant, egotistical, charismatic Joker or charismatic villain was honestly rewatching the original Batman the Animated Series from the 90s. Mark Hamill just pulls this emotion, and the writers do a great job. Paul Dini, Tim. I can't remember all the writers, but all of them did a good job of creating a narrative for the Joker, and then you have Mark Hamill creating this personality for the Joker more so than just a script. It is the yin to Batman's yang,
and especially if you ever watch. When Mark Hamill and Kevin Conroy would record their lines together in the same room back in the day when they had all the actors record together, I found out they don't do that anymore, even on American shows. But you got to see an interaction between the two that shows they played off each other.
Well, exactly. And I think that's why it's so hard when you see other Jokers, because first, a kid who is from the 90s, that's all you see is Mark Hamill. And anytime I hear Mark Hamill, I think, oh, he's the Joker, unless he actually sounds like Luke Skywalker. Then it's hard to match them two together. But
the modern Jokers, Troy Baker and John DiMaggio, have done good jobs, but they just haven't been able to match up to what Hamill has made the icon of the character.
John DiMaggio is probably my favorite of the more recent. I can't remember who did the Batman and who did the Joker in the Batman series.
I can't remember either.
If you want to post in the comment section, I'll ask Kaiji Okami as well. He'll tell me, but he did a really good job as well.
Yeah. Now, for me, when it comes to villains that just ooze that neutral evil aspect, but have that charismatic, and you want to see them win, but you realize they're just one of the most horrible, despicable people, but you still want them to win? Yoshikage Kira and his lovely fetish of the hands.
Okay, Chrysalis Bloodborne, or whatever in the world his name is. He's one of our best friends. I can never figure out what he wants to call himself. Chrysalige Bloodborne.
Yes.
Okay, stupid video games. Nevertheless, we actually had a long conversation about Yoshikage Kira and you. Because we were both talking about, for the current JoJo's arc, King's Crimson versus Dio versus Kira, and he and I could not, we both like Kira, but you have a very special place in your heart for Kira.
Oh yeah, Kira for me is one of those villains that every time something goes wrong, he just figures out a way to scuttle away. Figures out this way to end up doing something to make it so he just can't get there. But, just like any good written villain of this archetype, there's going to be a point where they just snap.
Well, I do have to admit, Kira definitely can think himself out of a box.
Yeah.
It's a very creative character type because, one, very few villains ever can coldly and calculatingly think. Because that's the hard part when you come to a villain. And it's the hard part when you come to a hero. It's usually the side heroes, or if you have a detective type hero, that can really think themselves out of a box. Very rarely do you have a villain who has that calculating, because I very rarely see that.
Yeah, it's very rare, and when he gets into the tightest of boxes, he's actually able to get himself to a point where it's like, okay, this is what's going to help me, and even achieves a power later on with Bites the Dust to actually get himself into situations that he's assured and calculated himself to get out of these problems. But that ends up being the downfall at the same time.
Well, that's why it's just interesting when you come back to different types of characters, because Dio,
yeah,
the
egotistical cliche villain.
And anytime anyone hears JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Dio is the main villain that everyone knows, even though he's only featured in two of the
parts, and then as a side villain in another part.
Exactly, but he's so prominent and he's so fixed in the universe that everybody knows who he is. And he's one of those villains that's very common. He's very egotistical. He can be very charismatic depending on how he's presenting himself, but he's also extremely emotional.
And those emotional villains are ones that, because we're human and have a lot of those emotions, we seem to gravitate towards as well. Exactly,
because we don't want to see ourselves in the villain, but the only way to make a villain work is the audience, be it in a visual sense, be it when you're reading, be it when you're hearing it. That's the only way it works, is there has to be some piece, some element of the villain that just connects with you. Even if it's so simplistic, there just has to be that relationship. Because it's like the hero. None of us can ever be the hero.
True.
Because the heroes, depending on the story, they're larger than life. And it's hard to be able to match that. But you want to feel like you could pretend to be the hero. You have some of the qualities. You could get there. That's why everybody, when they're kids, is like, what superpower would you want if you could be? It's because that's the way the hero and the villain both work together to make it a good story.
Yeah. It's not just in mediums or with comics or TV shows. Even in books and novels you'll read, it's the same aspect. Mm-hmm. And especially with somebody that likes Star Wars. You look at Darth Vader, you look at Palpatine, you're like, Darth Vader's the cool one, Palpatine's the one I don't want to even see or even think about, when both ooze that same authoritarian leadership style of evil. Another character that's like that too, Magneto.
Magneto, yes, because he also, kind of like what we were talking about Black Widow earlier, depending on how it's written and how it's portrayed, he teeters on that villain to anti-hero.
Yeah, and it's what makes him such a compelling character as well. Because you just, given the situation, you don't know where he's going to fall on the spectrum.
Well, and think of like Apocalypse. Not Apocalypse from Age of Apocalypse, a new movie. That was terrible. Or not Age of Apocalypse, just Apocalypse.
But the 90s arc with Apocalypse in the comics.
Yeah, the 90s arc of Apocalypse in the comics, or the animated show, or the Age of Apocalypse comic that took place in the 90s. That was the alternate universe. That was my first introduction to, I would say, more than... Even though I read comics and I read about a lot of these characters, it wasn't a consistent trend. So my first introduction to Apocalypse, to liking Cyclops, to Magneto, and all these other characters was Age of Apocalypse. It just blew my mind of a narrative. And that was what got me to read, like, X-Men or Hulk or all of those others.
And for me, this is another character that can teeter on the I'm going to be an anti-hero, I'm going to be a villain, but actually led their own comics in the 90s and in the 2000s, the Darkness. Just the having the power of this creature inside your body and just having to go out there and, well, are you going to go kill the mobsters? Or are you going to work with the police? Or are you going to go after the corrupt police that still do good for the city, all to protect your own skin and protect the people you love? And that's also because of the Darkness. I got into reading the flip side of the hero with Sarah Pazzini and Witchblade.
Oh yeah, I remember that one too.
Yeah.
I've read more of the Darkness than Witchblade, but that's the other reason of why I like video games so much.
Yeah.
Is, like, for example, the Danganronpa series. I love the series because you have very creative villains. You have and I'm not going to really spoil the video games because it's hard to really spoil without.
Yeah, because both of the two villains are so integral to actually the plot that you want to experience for the first time yourself if you don't know it.
But it's one of those stories where the video game helps to create this universe, and you get to play as the hero, but you get to watch everything the villain's doing, and you are experiencing it in a very creative manner. That's one of the reasons why I like the Persona series, is you get to play almost that detective, and you get to watch what the villain does before you actually see the villain. You get to see the world unfold.
With 3, the villain's kind of ambiguous towards the end, where with 4, you don't know the villain's been right in front of you the entire game. And because the villain, as you first meet him, seems like this wimpy character, and when you come out to realize who it is, it's like, wow, you're a good two-faced liar.
And that's another thing to think about when it comes to a villain. Is another good design for a villain is how are they written? Because you have villains like that are so ambiguous. Die Ranger.
Oh yeah.
You're the mentor. He is this great mentor. You feel so connected to him, and then later in the series, you get the rug ripped right out from under you. as not only the audience who's experiencing this, because there's that built of trust, even as a fan of the show, you feel so trusting of this mentor because he's helped so much to guide, to teach, to lead, and then it's just thrown in your face.
Another Toku series that did that really good, and is Kamen Rider Blade. One of the writers, not going to tell you who, but one of the 4 writers in the show, you're built up to trust this guy, and then you find out in the last few episodes who he really is.
Oh, yes. And the reason why that's so powerful as in a therapeutic manner is because when you read, when anyone reads anything, you live vicariously through one of the characters, be it the hero, be it the villain. More often than not, they're trying to lead you to vicariously live through any of the heroes. And if you do get so immersed in something where you do that, and then you have it just ripped out, it causes this emotional reaction, and that's what makes something good. If you can feel emotion, because the first 5 minutes of Up makes me cry, and I've seen the movie like 30 times. And that's because it's such a visceral, emotive reaction. Gundam's a great example, and there's so many examples of that. We'd probably spend an hour and a half.
We could spend an entire episode on it, but for me, Haman Karn's probably one of the villains that takes the cake for me on being the complex villain that you just love to hate. Yes,
and I think that's the last category we'll go on, is the love to hate, because that is, in so many times, I think we've talked about this with other characters, but while other characters have so many other complexities that you connect with, there are just those characters that you have that with heroes just as much as you have it with villains, because Kaiser from Thighs, I hate him.
Yeah, I somewhat sympathize with Kaiser, but we'll not go into that.
No, we won't go there. But Haman Karn is a great example of a villain that you can't wait for them to lose. For me, that was always in the original trilogy, because I never felt this connection to Darth Vader that everyone else did. Initially. Now I understand where people are coming from, but he was one of those villains I just couldn't wait.
Where for me it was Palpatine was the one I couldn't wait for to get the comeuppance.
I'm trying to think of another series.
Well, for me, go back old school gaming on the SNES. Kefka's a villain that Kaiju loves to death, but he's a villain I like too and find to be one of the best villains in Final Fantasy. But he's another one of those you can't love but hate, because he just does the most horrible shit to people.
Oh, he does. There's just so many villains, and I think that is what I love about pop culture. No matter what form you go in, even with sports or wrestling, my lord, there were so many years where I was watching WWF. I refuse to call it WWE because I grew up on WWF. So you had that, you had WCW, you had ECW.
Well, the writers are able to just create with these. You get those ones you just love to hate.
Oh my god, Hunter Hearst Helmsley and Kain. I hated them, but they created such a narrative.
Generation X, if you go with the WCW.
Yes, Generation X, and not NWA, because that's no, or was it NWA for wrestling too?
Yep, they did. Yeah. Generation X, when they left the WWF to go to WCW, became NWA.
Yeah, it's so, and you even have it with sports teams. I can remember so many times as a kid, even if I'm not a sports fan, there were so many times that the opposing team for the Buffalo Bills, which always lost, so I never understood why people rooted for them, or the Sabres, everybody would boo the opposing team if they were not their home team. It's our nature to have a hero versus villain. And if you can't have a good villain to go against a hero, then you're going to lose it.
Yeah, exactly. Just don't be like the city of Philadelphia and boo Santa Claus. Yeah.
What?
Yes. There was a Eagles game. Santa Claus came out of the field. Not only are the Eagles fans booing their own team and booing the opposing team, they're booing Santa Claus on the field.
Why would you boo Santa Claus? Santa Claus is awesome.
This is why Philly fans get crap.
I didn't live in Philly, but I lived pretty close at times. I've been to Philly, and I've never understood that particular city. If you're from Philly, I love y'all, but just like with New Yorkers, you're weird. And I'm a New Yorker, so I know that.
Well, at least you're come to understand why natives like myself of Colorado call it a Rocky Mountain High.
Yeah. I've always been fascinated, but once again, villains are awesome. Without villains, we would not have great heroes. And without great heroes, we would not have awesome stories. So it's a symbiotic relationship. They're not mutually exclusive. And anybody who really tells you they are, they're really not. You can't have one without the other. And there are great examples. I think we could do another episode of just perfect examples of stories that had terrible villains and or terrible heroes that you can see fell apart because there was nothing for the other side to work against.
If there's really been only one story I've ever seen, and it's still ongoing, even so it could fall apart when the novels get towards their conclusion, but Overlord's the first show and book series I've watched and read where the main character is the villain. There's no real heroes that oppose him, because a lot of the ones that oppose him turn out to be just as bad before he goes full Overlord. That authors somehow managed to keep it interesting, keeping the character like this in a world where he's the supreme Overlord is a villain, and kept it fresh. It's been a miracle. It's probably going to be the only time we see a story like this unless it falls apart at the end.
Well, that's what I'm thinking, because even if you take a series like Fruits Basket, which is a shoujo manga / anime, it's not like you have definitive heroes versus villains. It's not like Dragon Ball or Code Geass, but every show has a hero type and a villain type.
Yep.
And you have the hero as Toru Honda, and she categorizes so many of the qualities of a hero, and you have the villain with Akito Soma. And it's interesting because, once again, if you know the manga, you know the backstory, so I'm not going to ruin it here because the original anime, as much as I love it, does not do Akito any justice.
Yeah. And for a story to work as well, if there's any kind of protagonist, even if there isn't a villain, society could be the villain,
yes.
Or even nature, or even just some kind of random technology with no personality. You're still going to have that.
Well, yes. Perfect example is Portal.
Yeah.
GLaDOS is a computer. GLaDOS is not a human. GLaDOS is a potato at times, which I still think is beyond awesome. But GLaDOS doesn't even take on the persona of a human.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like what you learn in elementary school. Nature, man versus man, man versus nature.
Yep.
And that's exactly what it is. And that's a really good point, because when we go into another episode on villains, we can go in depth on all the different types of villains and show examples of all of those as well.
Yes. So with that, we're going to close out tonight's Therapy Chair. We hope you enjoyed yourself. I'm Advent Nebula.
I'm Cruellica Kain. Have a great night.